A great nuclear war takes place on Earth, after which the survivors are struck by a plague. People survived as best they could, hiding in settlements scattered across the continents, praying only for the skies to finally clear and the ocean to breathe again. In 2013, several decades after the war and the collapse of modern civilization that followed, a nomad travels on a mule through the post-apocalyptic wasteland that was once the state of Utah. The man surveys the scorched desert and remembers a winter that lasted 3 long years and the barren, poisoned ocean. Now, for many days, he has been walking through lands where people once lived, but now only wild animals roam, those that miraculously survived. Soon the man reaches the remnants of a settlement where the wreckage of cars and buildings still stands. His mule immediately runs toward a puddle of water, but the man pushes the animal away. He must first check if the water is safe to drink. He tests it and concludes the liquid resembles turpentine more than water. However, this does not deter the mule, which brings an amused smirk to the man's face. While the animal drinks, the man enters a ruined diner and, sitting down on a couch, pretends to watch TV and read previews of upcoming television shows. Suddenly, a sound of something falling echoes behind him. The man grabs his rifle, but it turns out to be just a small antelope, scared of the human and eager to run as far away as possible. Startled by the animal, the man thoroughly searches the place. Finding an old vending machine, he breaks it open. Discovering several packs of real cigarettes inside, the man feels like a rich man and says so to his mule. He spends the night in the old building. When morning comes, the man explains to his mule that his main rule is to avoid civilization at any cost. That's the only way to stay out of trouble. Then he brushes the mule's teeth. Later, he arrives at a settlement where a one-man play based on Shakespeare's poetry is being performed on a small wooden stage for the residents. The show delights the children and the few adults in attendance. One of the women accompanies him on an old piano, making the performance rather engaging. In gratitude, they invite him to the table. Hot soup is on the menu today. Suddenly, the bell rings, signaling the arrival of the Holnist army that dominates the area. The townspeople reassure the traveler that the bandits rarely kill anyone nowadays and admit they are forced to share their supplies in exchange for peace. But the man chooses to hide behind the nearest house. Soon, the Holnist patrol enters the settlement. Their leader, General Bethlehem, demands to know what is going on. One of the children recites a poem he remembered, but this only irritates the general. The settlers didn't prepare enough game meat, yet somehow had time for a play. He announces a conscription into his army, selecting suitable men based on age and ethnic background, personally inspecting the population, and rejecting anyone with non-Caucasoid blood. Seeing this, the nomad tries to quietly slip away, but one of the kids notices him and waves. General Bethlehem sees this too. The man is captured. He tries to protest, explaining that he's just passing through, but he is struck in the head and loses consciousness. Sometime later, he and several other selected men are brought to a Holnist camp. The general announces that a new life is beginning for them. From now on, they are soldiers in the unified army of Nathan Holm. He asks what each man did in the old world. Learning that the traveler is an actor and knows Shakespeare's verses, the general recites a few lines himself to show off his education. He promises to turn the traveler into a real warrior. When the man refuses to fight, the general beats him and gives him the nickname Shakespeare. Later, one of the young men, Woody, brings him water. When the man regains consciousness, Woody asks him to recite the poem he read in the town again, the one that spoke of defiance and freedom. But then a guard reminds them they need sleep. In the morning, training begins. At dawn, the group of new recruits runs their first cross-country march, after which they have no strength left to resist anything. In the evening, they are served a meal made from the mule's meat. It is declared that such filth has no place in the New World. Shakespeare barely manages to suppress his true feelings. Meanwhile, General Bethlehem's aide, Captain Idaho, forbids feeding the last recruit in line for the cauldron, saying that if he's not in a hurry, he must not be hungry. The unlucky man protests, but there's nothing he can do. Then Shakespeare gives him his own portion. The young man swears he'll never be last again and vows to earn the general's favor. Later that night, the soldiers are shown an old action movie, but the audience begins hurling rocks at the projection booth. They already see enough violence and death every day. The projectionist is forced to switch to a beautiful musical love story that reminds them of the happier past. The people settle down, enchanted by the scenes on the screen. The next morning, the general explains that from now on, they will all live by 8 rules passed down by the great thinker Hone. Thus, the number 8 becomes their symbol. Each recruit will proudly bear it as a branded mark on their forearm. The first rule, obey orders without question. General Bethlehem orders everyone to sit. One man finds no chair and is immediately seized and hung upside down. He could have sat on the ground. This introduces the second rule, punishment must be swift. The poor man screams, begging for mercy, claiming he simply didn't know the rules. The general continues. Rule 3, mercy is for the weak. Rule 4, fear paralyzes reason. Therefore, Rule 5 demands absolute loyalty to the clan. Rule 6, justice can be enforced. Rule 7 states that any clan member may challenge leadership in combat. The general offers to fight anyone who dares, but no one steps forward. And Rule 8, the only punishment is death. With those words, the general kills the man who misunderstood his earlier order. He reminds the shocked recruits that if they work hard, they will always be fed. If they fight well, they will be respected. And if they die, they will be remembered. The general leaves. Sergeant Idaho explains that the last person who dared challenge the general, Colonel Getty, was left without a tongue and now follows her master everywhere like a loyal dog. Later, the general summons Shakespeare and tells him that before the war, he was just a regular electronics salesman. If not for his encounter with Holmes, he would have remained a worthless nobody. Holmes' book became his Bible, and now he's determined to build a new, pure, and just world. He also promises to make Shakespeare a fine officer because he sees intelligence in him, and smart people are in high demand. For now, General Bethlehem orders Shakespeare's binoculars to be given to the scouts and his book of poems to be burned. The man returns to the camp, now firmly set on escaping. He finds Woody and the unlucky one. He urges them to join him in the escape. Woody hesitates, unsure if he's ready to run, but Shakespeare encourages him to take the risk. Somewhere on the coast lies the city of St. Rose, where people still live in peace and prosperity. Their conversation is overheard by the unlucky one, but he refuses to run. He wants to earn favor here. The next morning, the unit led by General Bethlehem sets out on a hunt and eventually reaches an old suspension bridge over a river. The night before, on the other side of the river, the soldiers had shot a lion, presumably an escapee from a zoo. But the wounded beast fled into thick brush and has already injured a couple of soldiers, making the passage unsafe. Sergeant Idaho calls for a volunteer to find the animal. The unlucky one steps forward eagerly, but the sergeant sees he's unfit for the task. Woody, a giant of a man, also refuses to take the risk. So Idaho orders Shakespeare to search the bushes for the dead soldiers and finish off the lion. He's about to offer him a rifle with one bullet, but General Bethlehem, observing the scene, commands to give him only a knife. The man crosses the bridge and searches the thicket. He finds only a soldier's corpse. Hoisting the body onto his shoulder, he heads back. But as he walks across the bridge, he realizes this may be his only chance at freedom. He slows down. At that moment, a plank gives way beneath his feet and he falls into the river. The soldiers on the bank open fire, but the fast current carries the man to safety. Sergeant Idaho orders Woody to jump in and chase Shakespeare down, to kill him at all costs. The unlucky one runs along the riverbank in pursuit. Soon, Shakespeare reaches the shore, where the unlucky one finds him. The man asks the youth to step aside, but he refuses and starts shouting for the soldiers, revealing the escapee's location. Shakespeare is left with no choice. He kills him, but Shakespeare doesn't have time to escape. Woody appears on the riverbank. Shakespeare asks him to think before attacking, saying they can run away together. But then the sergeant shows up and goads Woody, demanding he kill Shakespeare. However, the young man refuses and stabs the sergeant with a knife. In retaliation, the sergeant kills the defiant boy. Shakespeare uses the distraction to disappear into the bushes. The wounded sergeant follows him and ends up in the jaws of the